Do life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm the Reverend Brooke Ashley.
And I'm Justin Bowling.
And tonight starts our 30 days of Spook-tac-ular Halloween, something, yada, yada, whatever they say in the retail sector. We decided
Here's your
that
pumpkin spice.
That's right. We were going to do 30 days of sort of spooky topics or Halloween-esque topics. So that tonight starts it. We are going to begin with talking about Christianity in horror films. We are going to, dive into some of the pop culture of horror and see if we can find Christianity, and it's everywhere. So let's get started.
Spoiler.
And I am just not a horror flick. Like when I told Aaron we were going to talk about horror flicks, he said, do they know that you don't watch them at all? And
No, did not know that.
No,
I assumed everyone did.
It's been a while for me too, because Sarah, my wife, has the same type of opinion as you do. But horror films are not fun for me to watch alone. The fun in watching a horror film is when you watch it with somebody else.
Yeah. Them get scared and stuff.
So I don't watch them nearly as much as I used to. I used to watch them all the time, but
I'm really hard to be scared, and that's the problem with horror films now for me. Used to, it would scare me a lot, and it's more fun when you get scared. But I can't tell you the last one that scared me, honestly.
So horror films, people are just dumb in them. Like they make dumb decisions.
So let's put a distinction. In horror, there are slasher films.
Those are dumb.
Those are dumb for sure. But then there is more sophisticated films. I would say any in the Conjuring universe, those are really good stories, and I don't think people are dumb there. A lot of those are actually based on true stories. So
I do like M. Night Shyamalan, and that his name. What's his name?
That's as good as I could possibly pronounce it. So,
yeah.
So I do watch some of his movies, and so would you consider like a movie like The Bone Collector to be horror?
I don't think I've watched it, but I don't know. Like what it's about. What is it about?
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of serial killer kind of things, and
is the intent of the movie to scare you?
To scare the bedeeper out of you, yes.
Okay, then yeah, it probably would be. Yeah, there's different
Google
flavors.
rates it as a thriller.
Okay, so so there's thriller, and then when I think of horror, like I think of the slasher thing. And no, I'm not a fan of the slasher things. Like,
right.
So one of my favorite commercials is the one where they talk about people making bad decisions or whatever, and they're like in a slasher film, and they like run into where all the chainsaws are instead of running to their car. Like that's how I view these slasher
honestly
movies.
It wouldn't matter if they were running to the car. They're going to trip and fall, and they're going to get caught. Like it's just always the case. There's stereotypical things that happen in slasher films.
So Abby is terrified of sharks, and one day she was watching this movie, and I don't know why she was watching it, but I would classify this as a horror movie. Everybody was getting eaten by sharks.
Yeah, that's pretty.
They were scuba diving in these caves, and there were these prehistoric shark things, and they were coming and eating and tearing people apart, and like there was like 30 of them that started out, and 2 people survived, and there was this huge scene at the end where like the prehistoric sharks were like jumping and trying to bite the people as they were getting onto a boat. So I have watched that one lately.
Yeah,
if the birds can be a horror film, I'm 100% sure sharks can be a horror film.
Yeah, and honestly, like Jaws itself, I would say back in that day, that was probably pretty terrifying to see a great white shark like that.
So I feel like we've totally expanded the idea of what constitutes as a horror movie.
Well, I think we had to so that you could talk. But it's fine. Like, I think any movie that is sort of tries to bring that scare factor in to your emotion when you're watching it, I think that would constitute as horror.
Totally The Stand by Stephen King.
Anything,
And I do-
almost anything from Stephen King, I would say,
Yeah,
it would be horror.
I do love that book.
What about It? Have you seen It?
The one with the clown?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's been a while.
So I love It. That's probably my favorite Stephen King.
Yeah.
I haven't read the novel, but the movies, and that's one of the ones that even the reboot I liked probably just as much as
I
the
haven't
original.
seen the reboot.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's definitely a level of creepy. And again, these things don't scare me. It's just a level of a creepiness.
Oh, look how tough I am.
clowns.
These don't scare me.
I am big and I am tough. I am big man. But no, some things just creep me out. Clowns are one, and dolls are two. Dolls is probably the most creepy thing that I can think of. So
yeah. Yeah.
That's a common theme you see too, like those dolls, and there's always like a kid singing in a lot of Stephen King, especially like the TV adaptations of his novels or like the movies. Yeah, that's always a common.
I was trying to think, is it The Perfect Storm that does the I'm a Little Teapot? Do you remember?
No, that's the one I thought you were trying to talk about. Perfect Storm was the George Clooney, like on a boat movie. The one you're thinking, shoot, it's like a blizzard.
Storm of the Century.
Storm of the Century. Yep, that's it.
Storm of the Century. That's what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So maybe I've seen more Stephen King things than, but so for me, I've struggled with The Stand during the pandemic. Like, I mean, but not the new version of The Stand.
I watched one episode of that and I was like, I'm done. This is boring.
Yeah, we watched one episode of it. Now, you want to talk about Christianity appearing in horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is majorly the battle of good and evil is throughout that Stand book and miniseries. So I guess it's not technically a movie.
Right.
But this ages me. We originally watched The Stand on VHS when Blockbuster was still around. And it came in 2 sections of VHS tapes. So we had rented, we were very early married and rented it. And we only got with like 1 set of them. We had to call Blockbuster back and they held open the store because it was, way late in the night. And we ran into town and got the rest of the movies and we watched the entire thing in one day.
That's great. I don't think I've seen The Stand miniseries, well, either of them, I guess. So I really do need to check that out.
The new one, I'm not a fan.
Yeah. So speaking of miniseries, I actually just watched one, and I don't know if either of you are interested in watching Midnight Mass, but I would suggest you do if you're not interested.
So I totally saw your Facebook post about that yesterday, and I was like, wait a minute, he's Episcopalian. Do they do midnight mass? Like, I had no idea what you were talking about. And I was like, it would just be like Stacy to go to church at midnight instead of like the normal.
I have went to church at midnight, one for Easter and one for Christmas.
Yeah, that's why I was totally thrown. I was like, there's no major religious holiday. Like, what the heck? What's he doing at church?
So really loves the Feast of St. Francis is what it is. He's really
that's what it is. I'm there at midnight for Francis. But no, it's a horror series. And what's interesting about it is it really does not, like, it touches on so many different topics that it really didn't need to be a horror film or horror series. It could have been just a normal series. And I would have been interested in it because it touches on a lot of things that I found interesting, like separation of church and state and just different things like that. But with the horror element, now they borrow hard on, and one of the things that we were going to talk about here is vampirism, and there was a lot of like Christian, I guess, blending of vampirism where the Christians are partaking the blood and body of Christ, and I guess that was seen as a form of vampirism or something back in the day when it was first caught on, and that they borrow hard, that series does, on that. And even though I really love the story, and it hooked me. After episode 2, I was hooked. I had to watch them all. There's 7 episodes. I did find that some of the scenes were made me feel a bit awkward. It was like, should I actually like this? Like, and there's a question I wanted to bring up to you: is there a point in movies, specifically horror films, that borrow hard on Christianity and have Christian imagery and stuff? Is there a line where this is too anti-Christian, too sacrilegious? Like, is there a line, or can we like just say this is fiction, we know it, and we can just view it?
I will definitely let Brooke answer first, but I before she does, I do want to point out that it's kind of ironic that you're saying that, because there's a article on Vox that's floating around the interwebs right now that's talking about that they couldn't enjoy Midnight Mass because this person's they're pretty adamantly anti-religion. That's the author of the article, and they thought it was too positive towards religion, and they thought it was kind of a betrayal to their values, so they couldn't watch it. But yeah,
That's interesting.
That is interesting.
That's interesting. I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of things that I watch that portray the church in ways that I don't agree with, or portray Christianity in a light that I don't necessarily see true. But with that said, I mean, I think that our pop culture does shape the way people see the church. Right. So I think I struggle a little bit with that sometimes, but I also think that as the church, we have shied away from the conversation about demonic forces or Satan, and we've made it to where we can't talk about that because we don't want to be looked at as being weird or odd. Right. And so we've let pop culture tell that side of our story for us. And that's a problem for me. I mean, that's where I struggle.
I think for me, there's definitely been times when I have a hard time enjoying something because of that. But I think it's when I feel like that it's bleeding into the moral of what they're trying to get across from the show type thing. So like if their point is about how, corrupt Christianity is and stuff like that, like you can, I think for education purposes, there's sometimes you can get something out of that. But in terms of like using it as entertainment at that point, I have a hard time enjoying something to when they're, the point that they're like proselytizing is that, Christianity's bad. Yeah. That does kind of, and I know that's kind of a subjective thing on when, that's what they're going after, and when that just happens to be a background in this fictional show. But yeah, that's the point for me when it comes across to me, is that's their message.
That makes sense. And I will say that Midnight Mass definitely does not do that. Like it is very pro religion in this almost. It's just that I guess it's because I have such a high view of communion, and that is sort of the driver in this show. And they turn it on its head and turn it into a horror element. And that's what that's kind of what made me uncomfortable. Like, dang, I understand why you're doing it. This is actually good for the story, but it's just making me so uncomfortable, So that was my whole thing.
What,
I do like the point that you. Oh, go ahead.
Well, go ahead, because I may be end up changing the subject on us a little bit.
No, I was just saying, I did like the point that you brought up about how we kind of defer that conversation off, and that's even almost like a trope in itself in a lot of these movies. There's this older, priest or something who's a exorcist, and he believes in all this demonic stuff, but the younger, hipper guy's like, no, that's not what it is. We don't believe that type of stuff anymore, and that's kind of how. Even if we don't, that's not really the truth. That's almost how we treat it type thing. Like, this is a thing for the past. That's, the Middle Ages. That's, way in the past. So yeah, we probably shouldn't cede that ground to Hollywood, because they're probably not going to tell the story the way we would tell it.
Yeah. And I don't know that I wrestled with a lot of this stuff until I actually went off to seminary, and I was surrounded by people who weren't from America, right? I mean, they were from Africa and Asia, and some of these conversations are more real than, talking about forces and good and evil and that kind of stuff. We don't talk about that in our Western context unless we're talking about horror flicks. But one of the things that I was going to talk about making me uncomfortable, maybe more so than even horror that makes me uncomfortable, are like the Dan Brown movies, like the Da Vinci Codes and that kind of stuff.
So
that makes me a little more uncomfortable for Christianity than some of the horror flicks.
That's the legit one I had in my mind when I was saying that there's some that kind of bleeds over into their message, because he always liked to play both sides of the fence. Where he's like, "Oh no, I'm making a fictional world, but this is based on a lot of true stuff," type thing, and like not really committal. And maybe a lot of it was to build up, advertise for his books and movies and stuff. But he always played both sides of the fence there, to where like, "Oh, this could be real," and it bugged me. I didn't enjoy it.
And I think when we look at horror films, I mean, most of us could see the element of religion in them, and but I think we view that differently than like a Da Vinci Code or another movie where it seems almost plausible, and that I guess I know that there are people who truly believe that stuff.
Right.
Like I don't know of anybody who truly believes horror films are true, right? Like
yeah, that's a good point.
So I think we're able to say that's more fiction than some of the other things that we're seeing out there.
Right.
Or even a TV show like The Good Place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have no problem watching that one. I enjoy it too. Yeah. But it's not like super friendly, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've had lots of conversations with people about religion and stuff because of it, but still.
Yeah. I think it's interesting though that a lot of our I guess horror monsters that we have, you have Dracula and you have Frankenstein and just all those, there's elements there of Christianity within them. So you have Frankenstein, you're basically you have a scientist who is playing God, and he turns nothing, and he makes a life out of nothing. That's a biblical story. But, there's the element of resurrection in here too. In a lot of different horror films, actually. Jason and Michael Myers, they're always coming back from the dead. And I feel like resurrection is a reoccurring theme in horror. It's just always
Jason
bad.
Coming back from the dead because of resurrection or because somebody wants to make more money?
Yes.
You asked that like it's a conflicting points.
Yes.
I mean, the same thing happens in soap operas,
Right. Stefano DiMera.
What's the guy from Days
of
There? It is. Yeah.
He always come back from the dead.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that man had more lives than a cat.
Probably the greatest villain of all time. Stefano DiMera.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's undisputed, right?
Yeah. And honestly, back in the day when I was living at home, Mom would watch that religiously, so I would always catch parts of it. The greatest storyline in Days of Our Lives, I didn't see us talking about Days of Our Lives in this, but here we are, is when Marlena was possessed by a demon. Do you remember that?
Oh, I do, actually.
Oh my gosh, that was the greatest. And John was a priest. John Black was a priest, and I believe he had to exorcise her. The greatest storyline.
I have no idea what y'all are talking about.
So I love how we went from horror flicks to Days of Our Lives.
That's right. Hey, remember Passions? It was all about horror and supernatural.
It was, actually.
There you go.
You're right.
This is a soap opera podcast.
I mean, I was thinking, because, well, our listeners may not know, but I don't do horror films like ever. Not anymore anyway. And not because I'm some moral high ground. They're just not entertaining for me. So why waste my time doing them? But there have been other things that I've struggled with, especially with my children, as they were growing up, because I felt like it portrayed religion in a bad way, or that I felt like it was in opposition to Christianity along some of these lines. I was trying to think of something right off. I mean, I'm sure they could give you a list immediately of the things that we kind of poo-pooed on, but and they love horror films. Like they love them. And I think with me, I guess I just see just enough nastiness in the world, the real world, that I don't need to
You don't need to see
watch it on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, there is enough nasty in the real world to deal with. Like to have to think that not only, and maybe here is my advocation for horror films, is that we aren't, because we are always in the here and now, and we have so much to, I guess, concern ourselves with in the present, in the physical world, that we're never thinking about what's going on in the spiritual world. But a lot of horror will bring that to light, like especially the Exorcist movies. It point blank, it's telling you, hey, there are demons. They are possessing people. That's something that you have to worry about. So I'm not advocating we should continue worrying, but it at least reminds us that, hey, there is elements of spirituality, the good and evil war in the spiritual realm that we should be concerned with. And this, I think, goes back to your point that we don't ever talk about evil in the church anymore. But we need to.
We don't.
We need to, because there are dark forces in this world. And that causes hauntings, that causes possessions, that causes lots of things that we can't explain. And I think that's the good thing about horror films, is it keeps that in the back of our mind. That, hey, some things, even, I guess, serial killers. The serial killers are a thing that we have to worry about. It's not common, but it is a thing. And horror films remind us of that.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see religion pop up so much. I mean, it's rare to find a horror film without some kind of mention of religion. Yeah. Like, it's more common than not. It's because you get to those questions that are not about the day-to-day stuff, but more so about these fundamental good versus evil. Like, there's no doubt that these demonic forces in these movies are evil. And when you're talking about something that's like, not human gray morality or something like that, you're going to get into these fundamental questions about, life, universe, good, evil, and God, and, like that. So religion has a natural spot in this.
Yeah.
So what do you think about like the novels and the movies, like This Present Darkness? And are y'all familiar with the Frank Peretti books? No, I can tell by the looks on your faces. Okay. So back in the day, y'all make me feel so old. There was this group of books. There was a trilogy. It was This Present Darkness and Piercing the Darkness. And I think the third one was The Prophet. And they were books that were written supposedly from a Christian perspective about spiritual warfare. And so if I remember right, and it's been many, many years since I've read these books, there were certain people who could see demonic forces on other people. So like they would just be walking around and they would talk about how the demon of greed was like embedded in these people. And so they could see the spiritual warfare that was happening around them. It's classified as thriller literature now. But it was advertised as being Christian thriller. But Frank Peretti's, and I also think the Left Behind series could kind of go into this kind of genre.
Anything Revelation.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, because I can remember those books coming out and people losing sleep, like having to go be put on medication because they were terrified that these things were going to happen.
Yeah.
And man, so I may not like horror movies, but I read all of those like cover to cover as soon as they came out, the Peretti books as well. I would not recommend the Peretti books now, I think, for people, because the theology is so whacked and it's written supposedly from a Christian perspective. So I have more of an issue with those books and those movies and that kind of genre than I really do what we're talking about, horror and thriller.
When you have movies or books that actually shape theology,
then
you have a problem with it, because that's when it's destructive to the church.
Yeah.
Just dealing with fiction movies
Yeah.
whatever.
So, I mean, here I'm having conversations with people about this fiction work, right? And they're saying, but I believe this more so than I believe scripture. That is a problem for me. Like, that's where we've crossed the line. When we put more faith into what, Frank Peretti is writing than what the scriptures are saying, that's a problem for me.
Yeah. Maybe that is a sign, though, that horror could become a problem if we don't actually, start talking about these types of things again. Because if everybody's theological opinions are going to be shaped by Hollywood, that's just as problematic.
Yeah, Christianity, I think, gives us a lot of imagery from the Bible and from outside sources, like Dante's Inferno, to where there's plenty of horror elements that can be portrayed. And I think that's why it is. Good luck finding anything more horror than Satan and fallen angels, demons. Like that tops in my line of like horror villains or whatever, that they're the top. But I think that's why you will see a lot of that, and there's a lot of movies that deal with fallen angels. There was the Prophecy movies with Christopher Walken. Remember that? He played Gabriel or Michael Angel.
We need to have a running counter on this of how many times somebody mentions a movie or book, and the other two are like, no idea.
I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it's just weird.
The problem is you don't watch horror movies, Brooke, and Bowling doesn't watch movies. So I'm going to have to talk to, I should have brought a mirror and talk to myself, I guess. That's my running line. I've been saying that for weeks now.
Talk to a mirror.
Talk to a mirror. Talk to a
Man in the mirror. I don't know. So I was doing a little research specifically on vampires. And apparently, like, vampirism was a heavily bought into belief in ancient cultures, such that grave sites would have to be conditioned with like garlic or other things. Some grave sites would be opened, and a stake would be put through the heart of the deceased, because they feared these people coming back as vampires. Like, I guess I didn't realize how big of a belief vampirism was. So, I was doing a little research.
You say ancient cultures, like what do you like? Do you remember the time frame? I'm just kind of curious.
So I think
you usually see vampires associated with Eastern Europe kind of type thing. Is that where it originates?
There is no. Actually, a vampire originates from. It's almost like a Greek myth, to where it's more of in the fallen angel realm, like a demon that has sharp teeth and wings and stuff. And you'll notice in some vampire movies, you'll see that version of it when it's more creature looking, like a bat. That is an ancient myth that was picked up in like the 15th, 16th century, 17th century with Vlad Dracula and turned human. So there's it's like a evolution of vampire. And so when I guess the sort of the 16th middle age version of vampirism picked up and they started becoming more human, that's when people started becoming afraid that anybody can be a vampire, So now we're going to have to worry about them coming back. And so apparently, like when someone dies and they start degrading, their fingernails get longer. It appears because their fingers are shrinking. It looks like their fingernails are getting longer, and I believe their fingernails may grow after death. And that's why vampires, the human version, have long fingernails, right? It's just seeing what the deceased does, witness what a deceased person does, and putting that on a vampire. And a vampire has the eternal life motif, right? Mm-hmm. They don't actually die. There's specific ways you can kill them, but if you don't do that, then they're going to live forever, right? So I know there was something you wanted to bring up in vampires that apparently you love, Brooke. You want to go ahead and bring that up?
Twilight. I mean, they're good.
The worst possible vampire series of all time.
They sparkle in
So
the
say when did
sun.
sparkles become? Is that from the Greek myth, or is sparkles a little bit later?
I mean, you put them in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you put them in the sun. So, to my defense, my kids grew up in the Twilight era.
Yeah, I've
And
watched
so
most of them.
although Aaron and I watched the first one with my sister, and we were like, "This is terrible." So, I mean,
Now, my wife Renee, she loved Twilight. She had the audiobooks. She had watched the movies 100 times, and she just loves it. Love the
Yeah,
story.
I'm pretty sure I have
And
like half of the novel series sitting back here on this bookshelf.
and it's fine
Sarah
for
used
what
to
it
read
is, but it's
I didn't
just
read
not.
them.
It's not the vampires that I'm used to. Like
Right.
what I really love, what at least in the earlier movies is crap. What is the movie? The vampire werewolves movie. You know, Bowen.
Underworld?
Underworld, exactly, the Underworld
Yeah.
series. I
Yeah, I like
loved
those.
that. I mean,
No
it
clue.
was more in, I guess, the action realm, where it was more of an action movie. You had the team vampire versus team werewolves, and that was the prequel to Twilight, by the way. So that's where probably that come from. But I just love that. Those movies.
Then you got the whole zombie genre.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it started in the late 2000s with The Walking Dead, and The Walking Dead is still going on, and it's been going on for a good 11, 12 years now. I mean, what in the world?
Yeah, I haven't seen an episode in.
Hey,
5, 6 years
I'm
now.
committed
I
to
don't think
watching
I've
it.
ever seen an episode.
Really? Well, you should watch the first 3 seasons and then quit. Because
Follow me. Yeah.
yeah, because that was when it was good, really, really good. But I have been just invested in finishing this story, and I'm still watching it. So the thing about, I mean, The Walking Dead, obviously zombies in general, it borrows heavily on resurrection, and it's obviously the worst thing you could possibly think of for resurrection. You having all these mindless creatures running around trying to eat you, and that, so the zombie. I'm trying to think. At least in Hollywood, that started in what, the 50s with the Night of the Living Dead, the black and white film. Anything earlier than
It's
that?
been a while. Yeah, I don't
It's
know.
been a
I don't
long
know
time.
like the complete history.
And I think they even had the now I have not looked at like zombie lore to figure out why do zombies eat brains? Like, when did that start? When did that become popularized? I don't know. But at least in The Walking Dead, they kind of evolved that from brains to just eating flesh. Like they actually want to, I guess it may be more vampiric in that they are trying to eat you in general. They eat body and blood, right?
Let's talk about the
So-
science and physiology of vampires here.
That's right.
I mean, as
Why do
zombies,
they
I
want
forgot what
blood?
we're even talking about. Yeah.
But I think
killing me.
I think the idea of with vampires, maybe zombies too, is that there's the belief that blood, there's life in blood, right?
Mhm.
So that's why if you are an eternal being, you would need to ingest something for nourishment, and that's the only thing that
Voldemort
could.
eats unicorn blood.
Well, there
in
you
He
go.
Harry
does.
Potter.
And he sustains himself because something so pure is yeah.
Yep.
We weren't
Uh,
supposed to speak his
I-
name.
I do
Not
think this
crazy.
comes back to almost something you were saying earlier about the playing God part when you're bringing up
Uh-huh.
the Frankenstein novel. It's like all these aspects are talking about something good and true and real, but then it's a slightly twisted version. So
Mhm.
it's like our own take on it, doing it
Yeah.
under our power rather than, the way that God has it planned. And that
Mhm.
seems like a very common theme through all these, resurrection, but it's the monkey's paw version of resurrection type thing, to where like something unexpected went wrong because you didn't account for it or something like that. And it's even like themes you kind of see in biblical, to where you see like the Antichrist portrayed as a lot of
Mhm.
like the same type of promises, but not the way that God promised them, like not ruling
Yep.
from an iron
The
throne or something like
stand.
that.
The
Yeah,
stand
it's
is
what
all
sin
about
is.
that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So, speaking of biblical references, while I was doing this deep dive into vampires, it led me to a character named Lilith. Are you all familiar with Lilith in the Bible?
A little bit. Yeah.
There's, I think, one mention in Isaiah of Lilith, and it is in reference to night creatures and things like that. And so they were talking a bit more about that. And so apparently in Jewish mythology, in between, I think it was 500, 700 AD, something like that, they expanded on the person of Lilith to basically make Lilith the first wife of Adam.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I'd never heard of any of this. Like, what is this? So the first wife of Adam, who basically refused to submit to Adam, wanted to be his equal type thing. So she was casted out of the garden, and then Eve was created. So that was sort of the I guess the story. And then Lilith took on the almost goddess role over night creatures, monsters, demons. Like they were in control of Lilith. And so the word Lilith, Lily, so you've got Lily from the monsters, right? There is a character in Magic the Gathering called Liliana, and I think these are all derived from this Lilith character of being in control of night creatures. And in Magic, that is what Liliana does. She is in control of these creatures of the night, zombies and all these things. And it just put everything into a perspective that I didn't realize, that there is, this character of Lilith that is all over pop culture that I didn't know where it came from. And apparently that's it. So I just thought that was really interesting.
See, Lilith appears a lot when you're looking at feminist theology.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
The idea of Lilith will pop up a lot, actually. If you dive into feminist theology.
Definitely not super familiar with a lot of that, but I've definitely been told before that like that's a lot why you see people will, in a lot of feminist circles, refer to themselves as witches or something like that, since they see it as a empowering thing or something.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Lilith is often looked as an empowerment thing. I'm glad you brought up the whole witches thing, because I think we don't make the correlation to Christianity a lot when we talk about witches. And I mean, scripture is full of caution and punishment for delving into witchcraft and sorcery. And, as paganism and witchcraft is becoming more popular in our culture, I really think that it is something that Christians need to take note of, that there are people being attracted to this religion, if you will, and who are claiming to be witches. And, it's a real thing. And, again, I'll go back to, we don't talk about it. I mean, we kind of gloss over some of the passages about Jesus casting out demons and the apostles casting out demons, and we try to make excuses for that. Well, they're just, psychologically ill, or but I mean, scripture's full of those references.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think it's paganism, witchcraft, things like that. It is becoming popular now, but I think it's partly in response, because if you look in history of how the church has dealt with it, it's been really, really bad. Look at the Salem witch trials. So many innocent people died from that. Right? So maybe it's just a reaction now. It's like, okay, people are more pro witchcraft because of the bad things that the church did in response to it, many decades ago, many centuries ago.
Maybe. I don't know if I'd draw a direct line from, the Salem witch trials, 400 years ago, to the rise of paganism in the past 15 years. I think I would put it more so towards something like the rise of, nuns, to people that aren't religious practicing people. And we still have that religious instinct in us. And
we
then
still want spirituality just without.
Right. And if you're going to have a personal spirituality without any sort of religious guidance or anything like that, that's where you're going to end up, as some kind of form of paganism. That's where people ended up historically, because that's just the natural inclination.
Turn to nature, worshiping nature.
Yeah.
And,
right. That's what I was saying. Yeah. And you can see it, you can touch it, you can, and honestly, it's one of the reasons why I really have trouble with people who claim to be Christians who talk about burning sage to get the bad juju out of a room or whatever. I mean, I'm like, y'all, I know you're kind of kidding, but you're not. I mean, if you're truly burning the sage, you think that it's doing something, right? So I don't know. I don't like
It's
it.
kind of funny you mentioned that too, because like a lot of the early medieval like attitude towards witches was when somebody would accuse somebody of being a witch, the accuser is the one that got in trouble because it's like, whoa, what are you doing believing in witches over here? Like, you sound like you're a and then it was more so when you started having competing religious groups that they were like, well, I'm going to show how serious I am by actually punishing witches, that they started ramping up the attacks on so-called witches. But yeah, I'll go ahead.
I think people looked at that, as witches being the enemy of Christianity, right? Like, witches were a threat to society or a threat to the church. I think as the modern church, what we've done is just said that's not real. Right? We've said that's just kind of Hollywood. There's no substantial anything to that. That's not a threat to us, so we're not even going to talk about it. And I don't want to say that it's a good versus evil or but I think that's why you don't see the church reacting very strongly to it, because they don't acknowledge the power that some of that may have.
Now, I think that's a Western church problem specifically. I think if you look at, African countries or South American countries, churches there that actually deal with demonic possessions and stuff way more often than we do. And I honestly think it is because of our belief that these things don't really exist, never did. And I think that's why we don't see them. Right. I think that Satan is pretty intelligent when it comes to this stuff. He's like, they don't believe in it. So you know what is more powerful against Westerners is to allow them not to believe in it.
This is a theme in the Screw Tape Letters. This is one of the ways that he's talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So we spent the night with somebody one time and we couldn't figure out what the problem was. Like, it just wasn't the bed wasn't comfortable. And come to find out, there were all kinds of stones between the mattress and the box springs, because supposedly different stones, different minerals did different things to your chakra or whatever. And so this person did it thinking it was a loving thing to do,
Oh, wow.
And that's when I really started thinking, if we're putting, so at first my kind of idea with some of this stuff came into being that I felt this was detrimental to people's faith in Christ, that they were misplacing their faith. And then I started really looking at how serious this really was, not just to people's faith in Christ, but that maybe there was something behind all of this, that maybe I hadn't taken this seriously enough. Or, and that doesn't mean I'm like looking around the corner all the time to see somebody casting a spell or whatever. But I do think it's something as the church that we need to talk about. And when we do, then people look at us like we're crazy with three heads. And which is why we didn't let our kids dress up as witches for Halloween.
There's a chapter in one of Chesterton's books, The Everlasting Man, where he talks kind of about this. Where he says that, we have this instinctual idea that like the darker forces are the things that actually get things done, and that's what you see a lot in horror films. Like, you can believe in God, but God's going to sit back and do nothing. But if you really want to get something done, you make a deal with the devil, and what he'll do is get this done for you, type thing. And that's what you see in like a lot of the older pagan religions in like the Middle East, like the Moloch, where they would sacrifice their kids to get something done. They would sacrifice to this pagan god, but to them, they believed these were real powerful beings, type thing, which is like you're saying, Justin, we don't really have that what is it, like cultural belief like that used to exist, or it exists in other parts now, to where we just kind of ignore it.
We don't necessarily believe in anything supernatural, the good or the evil. It's like we don't believe in miracles, because it's science can't explain it, so we can't believe it. And I just think that's ridiculous. Like, part of being a Christian is believing in miracles. And science is never going to explain resurrection. I just don't
our
believe it will.
podcast on horror movies just took a sharp right turn.
It sure did.
Yeah.
It sure did.
But it turned into something that me and you can actually contribute to.
I know, right? I think that was part of our things. We were like,
But
horror,
that's the
what?
good thing about horror films, right? Is this stuff is there and will bring out things for us to talk about.
It's one of the few spots in Western culture we actually still get to talk about these. Yeah.
Yes. So that is, I guess, the biggest pro that you can have to watch horror films. And I know that some Christians think that it's controversial that, if you're a Christian, you can't watch this. And I think there probably is a line. Like, if you feel convicted about watching something, then don't watch it. If you think it's
I
sinful,
think none of
do
these
it.
things are universal rules where like you have to watch it. If it makes you struggle in your walk with Christ, please
don't do it.
Right. Yeah. So this is interesting to me. So if we just said that as Western Christians, we don't believe that a lot of times that there's powers in this, like we don't do that, but yet we're going to judge people for watching horror movies that we don't think has any real power.
Yep.
Like,
can't have both ways.
Like, what's up with that?
I don't know.
Like, we instinctually know deep down that there's something real about it, but we kind of live our life.
We don't want to admit
it's not. We can get stuck in the day-to-day monotony and not have to worry about it.
Well, I mean, not having to deal with supernatural things that we can't explain is a little bit more comforting than having to deal with that too, right?
Listen, but I swear, y'all, I think people would rather talk about demonic forces than talk about the Holy Spirit. That's what I've decided.
Yeah, that's probably true too.
Probably true too. I mean, the Holy Spirit is, I think, a more complicated thing to understand. It's like, when is it actually the Holy Spirit working, and when is it actually you working? Whereas with a demonic spirit, it's like you can more or less tell when it's demonic.
We spent like 4 weeks in Sunday school in my Sunday school class. The last couple, actually, just last week, finished it up talking about the Holy Spirit, and then Aaron's been doing a sermon series on the absolute basics of Christian faith kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the Holy Spirit was that conversation today, and it makes people uncomfortable. Like, they would rather watch a horror movie than talk about the Holy Spirit. So,
well, we ought to do something about the Holy Ghost maybe in October.
So, spoilers, that is, we are doing a topic in week 3 on, I guess, hauntings, ghosts, demonic spirits. So, more in that realm. But, hey, if we can tie it into Holy Ghost bowling, we will do it.
I was proud of that idea. Yeah.
So, I can't wait to see what screen grabs you pull off this, because I've caught myself making some crazy faces and
I know
it's gonna be a good one.
Spirit fingers going a few times. Woo! I guess not everybody can see those, but
that's right. All right,
Lord
that's good stuff. Well, to close, I wanted to leave with a bit of inspiration, if you will. So, I was working in the lab late one night when my eyes beheld an eerie sight. For my monster from his slab began to rise, and suddenly, to my surprise,
the monster mash.
He did the mash.
It was a graveyard smash.
The monster mash.
It caught on in a flash.
The monster mash.
He did the monster mash. The monster mash. Okay, that's enough of that. All right. Peace be to you. Have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone.
Appalachian Liturgy Podcast is a JRS Studios production.